This section and its 4 objectives will be covered in 2 parts. At the end of this part 2 video, you should be able to fully compare the characteristics of the 2 moons of Mars, describe how volcanoes were discovered on Io, name one distinguishing characteristic of each of the Galilean moons, and compare the characteristics of the rings of Saturn with the rings of the other outer planets. Callisto. Of the 4 Galilean moons, Callisto is the farthest from Jupiter. Callisto is similar to Ganymede in size, density, and composition. However, Callisto has much more of a rough surface than Ganymede does. In fact, Callisto may be one of the most densely cratered moons in our solar system. Like craters on Earth's moon and other bodies in our solar system, craters on Callisto are the result of collisions that occurred early in the history of the solar system. Images like this one show a giant impact basin that is 600 kilometers across, and a set of concentric rings that extend about 1,500 kilometers in all directions from the crater. Moons of Saturn. Saturn has at least 47 moons. Most of them are small, icy bodies, and many of them have craters. However, 5 of Saturn's moons are fairly large. These 5 moons and many of Saturn's other moons are shown on the screen here. Titan. Saturn's largest moon, called Titan, has a diameter of more than 5,000 kilometers. Only Jupiter's moon, Ganymede, is larger. Unlike any of the other moons in our solar system, Titan has a thick atmosphere that is composed mainly of nitrogen. Titan's atmosphere is so thick that hydrocarbon smog conceals the surface. In 2005, the Huygens probe, part of the Cassini mission, gathered data about Titan's atmosphere. The information it gathered is giving scientists clues about how Titan and its atmosphere formed. When the probe got below much of the atmosphere's haze, it sent back clear images of the surface, which showed signs of flowing liquid, probably methane. Cassini also sent back many images of Titan, an example of which is shown on the screen here. Saturn's other moons. Saturn's icy moons resemble Jupiter's icy Galilean moons. Saturn's other smaller moons have irregular shapes. Scientists think that many of the smaller moons, such as Janus, were captured by Saturn's gravity. Moons of Uranus and Neptune. Uranus's 4 largest moons, Oberon, Titania, Umbriel, and Ariel, were known by the mid-1800s. A 5th, Miranda, was discovered in 1948 and is shown on the screen here. Other much smaller moons have been discovered recently by using spacecraft and orbiting observatories such as the Hubble Space Telescope. Astronomers know that Uranus has at least 24 small moons. Neptune has at least 8 moons. Triton, an icy moon, is unusual because it revolves around Neptune in a backward or retrograde orbit. Some astronomers think that Triton has an unusual orbit because the moon was probably captured by the gravity of Neptune after forming elsewhere in the solar system and then coming too close to the planet. Triton's diameter is 2,705 kilometers, and the moon has a thin atmosphere. Pluto's moon. Pluto is different from the other outer planets. Pluto's orbit is more elliptical and at a different angle than the other planets' orbits. Some scientists think that Pluto should not be considered a planet because several objects that are similar to Pluto in size and composition exist near Pluto's orbit. Unlike the relationships between other moons and planets in the solar system, Pluto's moon Charon is almost half the size of Pluto. Because Pluto and Charon are similar in size, some scientists consider them to be a double planet system. Charon completes one orbit around Pluto in 6.4 days, the same length of time as a day on Pluto. Because of these equal lengths, Charon stays in the same place in Pluto's sky, in the same way that one side of Earth's moon faces toward Earth. One side of Pluto always faces toward Charon.
Earth has one moon, but it is relatively large compared to the planet it orbits. Mars has two irregularly shaped moons, Phobos and Deimos, which are probably captured asteroids. Jupiter has at least 39 known moons, the largest of which, Ganymede, is bigger than the planet Mercury. Io is the most volcanically active body in the solar system. Europa may have subterranean oceans. Titan is the largest of Saturn's 30 known moons. Its thick atmosphere contains nitrogen, methane, and other gases. Dione is Saturn's fourth largest moon. Uranus has 21 moons. Its four largest are made of ice and rock and are heavily cratered. Two of these are Ariel and Titania. Miranda's unusual surface features suggest it was split apart and later rejoined. Triton is the largest of Neptune's 8 known moons. This geologically active moon has ice volcanoes that eject nitrogen gas. Pluto's moon, Charon, is more than half Pluto's size and is covered with frozen water. Charon's period of revolution is the same as Pluto's period of rotation. Therefore, it always occupies the same position in Pluto's sky.
Rings of the gas giants. Saturn's spectacular set of rings, shown on the screen here, was discovered more than 300 years ago. Each of the rings circling Saturn is divided into hundreds of small ringlets. The ringlets are composed of billions of pieces of rock and ice. These pieces range in size from particles the size of dust to chunks the size of a house. Each piece follows its own orbit around Saturn. The ring system of Saturn is very thin. Originally, astronomers thought that the rings formed from material that was unable to clump together to form moons while Saturn was still forming. However, evidence indicates that the rings are much younger than originally thought. Now, most scientists think that the rings are the remains of large comet-like bodies that entered Saturn's system and were ripped apart by tidal forces. Particles from the rings continue to spiral into Saturn, but the rings are replenished by particles given off by Saturn's moons. The other gas giants have rings as well. These rings are relatively narrow. Jupiter's rings were not discovered until Voyager 1 flew by in 1979. Jupiter has a single thin ring made of microscopic particles that may have been given off by Io or one of Jupiter's other moons. The particles may also be debris from collisions of comets or meteorites with Jupiter's moons. Uranus also has a dozen thin rings. Neptune's relatively small number of rings are clumpy rather than thin and uniform. At this point, you should be able to fully compare the characteristics of the two moons of Mars, describe how volcanoes were discovered on Io, name one distinguishing characteristic of each of the Galilean moons, and compare the characteristics of the rings of Saturn with the rings of the other outer planets.